Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving headfirst into social policy, what it actually is, and maybe more importantly, how different sociological viewpoints help us understand it.
Mm.
Think of social policy basically as the government's toolkit,
Yeah.
for tackling those big societal challenges like poverty, inequality, crime, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And for those of you perhaps navigating the world of sociology studies right now, this deep dive is really geared towards you.
Right.
We're sort of dissecting how these various sociological lenses interpret the role that sociology itself plays in shaping these policies. It's not just about knowing the policies,
No.
but understanding the thinking behind them, the different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a really fascinating set of perspectives to unpack here. Everything from the idea that sociology can offer almost a blueprint for a better society,
Mm.
all the way to a much more skeptical view, sort of questioning whether any single approach can truly fit our complex world.
Yeah.
We'll hit on functionalism, Marxism, feminism, even postmodernism.
Which brings us to a core question, really, for you to maybe chew on as we go through this. Can sociology provide objective, universally applicable solutions?
Good question.
Or are its insights always going to be colored, inevitably, by different values, different beliefs, maybe even the sociologist's own background? It's a fundamental debate, really is.
Okay, let's get into it then, starting with functionalism. Now, on the surface, this might sound a bit academic, maybe a bit dry, but stick with us.
Yeah.
Functionalists basically see society as this giant interconnected system, almost like a body,
An organism sometimes.
right? Where each part, families, the economy, education, has its specific job, a function, to keep the whole thing running smoothly.
Precisely. And this view gives sociology a very, very specific role. Emile Durkheim, who's a real cornerstone figure here,
Yeah, foundational.
he believes sociology could uncover social facts.
Yeah.
Think of them as these observable, measurable patterns in social life. And he argued that by understanding these facts scientifically, objectively, we could identify what's causing problems, what's dysfunctional, and then propose targeted solutions.
So it's like fixing a specific part of the machine, not tearing it all down.
Exactly. That's the piecemeal social engineering idea. You identify a specific issue, say a rise in youth crime, research its causes using sociological methods,
Right.
and then implement policies designed to fix that problem, maybe improve education or family support in that area.
And Durkheim's own work on education, emphasizing things like shared values, meritocracy, the idea that your success is based on talent and effort, not background.
Mm-hmm.
That directly fed into how modern education systems were developed, aiming for fairness, at least in theory. You still hear echoes of that today, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Debates about standardized testing, school funding, social integration, functionalist ideas are often lurking beneath the surface. Modern functionalists might support policies to improve public health or access to education, to keep things stable. Exactly. To maintain social order, reinforce shared values, keep that social machine running smoothly. For you sociology students, think about how functionalist research might look at, say, high divorce rates. They'd likely frame it as a potential dysfunction impacting social stability.
Okay, right. Now, let's pivot quite sharply. Let's look at the new right. Their view on the state's role is, well, pretty much the opposite.
That's putting it mildly, yeah. The new right perspective is deeply skeptical of state intervention, especially when it comes to welfare.
Okay.
Their core argument, and it's been influential, is that too much state support can backfire. It can create what they call a dependency culture.
Dependency culture, meaning people rely on the state instead of themselves.
Precisely. They argue it discourages personal responsibility, work ethic, maybe even stable family structures.
And this links to thinkers like Charles Murray, right? He talked about perverse incentives. What exactly did he mean by perverse there?
Yeah, Murray's work was, and still is, quite controversial. His idea of perverse incentives basically means that welfare benefits, however well-intentioned, can unintentionally create situations where people are financially better off not working or maybe delaying marriage or having children outside of a stable partnership because the benefit system makes it rational in a purely economic sense.
Ah, I see. So the incentive pushes behavior in a way that society might see as negative.
That's the argument. He saw these incentives as actively undermining things like the traditional family and individual initiative, which the new right views as crucial for a healthy society. For sociology students, notice how this directly challenges that functionalist idea of the state as this helpful problem-solving entity.
You definitely clash there. So if they're against big state welfare, what policies do the new right actually support? What's their alternative?
Well, Generally, they favor policies that shrink the state. Lower taxes, less regulation, encouraging private charity, perhaps over government programs.
Right.
And policies that often emphasize the traditional nuclear family model. Their view is that sociology's role should be to highlight the supposed negative consequences of state dependency
Okay.
and push for policies promoting self-reliance and individual responsibility.
Got it. A very different diagnosis, and so a very different prescription.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move again this time to Marxism. Another critical view, but focused squarely on the economy.
Yes, Marxists offer a really fundamental challenge. They argue the state isn't some neutral body floating above society.
Yeah.
No. They see it as fundamentally shaped by and acting in the interests of the ruling class. In capitalism, that's the bourgeoisie, the owners of the means of production.
Okay, so the state serves the powerful. How do social policies fit into that Marxist picture, then? Our source mentioned three main ways.
Right. So firstly, Marxists argue social policies help to legitimate capitalism, make it seem fair, or at least acceptable. Well, by providing things like unemployment benefits or some health care, the state creates this appearance of caring for everyone, masking the system's inherent inequalities and exploitation. It kind of takes the edge off potential discontent.
Okay, legitimation, what's the second way?
Secondly, policies like, say, the NHS here in the UK, while obviously providing essential care.
Which is good.
Of course, but from a Marxist perspective, it also serves to maintain a healthy workforce. Capitalism needs workers who are fit enough to be productive and generate profit. So keeping the workforce healthy serves capital's interests too.
Right, okay. And the third point, preventing revolution.
Exactly. The development of the big welfare states after World War II, for instance, is often seen by Marxists as a strategic move, a way to buy off the working class, reduce the threat of social unrest or even revolution by offering concessions and a safety net.
So even things that look like clear benefits for ordinary people.
Are viewed with suspicion. Marxists would say these are concessions won through struggle, perhaps, but ultimately limited. They serve to keep the overall capitalist system intact and are often the first things to face cuts when profits are squeezed. For you students, this perspective really pushes you to look underneath the stated aims of policies. Ask cui bono, who benefits, ultimately.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift focus again, this time to feminism, putting gender right at the center.
Yes, feminists argue, quite powerfully, that social policies are rarely gender neutral. They often reflect and, crucially, reinforce patriarchal assumptions and structures.
Meaning systems where men tend to hold the power.
Exactly, where society is structured in ways that privilege men and disadvantage women.
And the source gave some good examples, didn't it? Like policies historically built around the idea of a male breadwinner and a female homemaker.
Absolutely. Or think about maternity leave. While vital, the way it's often structured compared to paternity leave, can subtly reinforce the idea that childcare is primarily women's work.
Which can then impact their career paths later on.
Precisely. It can have those unintended or perhaps sometimes intended consequences. But, and this is really important,
Yes.
feminism isn't just about pointing out the problems. Feminist sociology and activism have been incredibly effective drivers of policy change.
Okay, so critique, but also action.
Definitely. Think about how sociological research exposing the gender pay gap provided the hard evidence needed to argue for equal pay legislation.
Right, like the Equal Pay Act.
Exactly. And also the Sex Discrimination Act. Plus, campaigning led to less gender stereotyping in school books and curricula, the creation of women's refuges, better policies around domestic violence.
So real-world impact driven by feminist analysis.
Absolutely. It shows how sociological understanding, when combined with activism, can challenge and reshape the policies that structure our lives. For sociology students, this is a clear example of theory directly informing social change.
It really underscores that point, doesn't it? Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the social democratic view. Where do they fit in this picture?
Social democrats share some ground with Marxists in that they clearly recognize deep inequalities in society.
Okay.
But the crucial difference is their belief that these inequalities can be significantly reduced through government action within the existing capitalist system. They don't believe a full revolution is necessary.
So reform rather than revolution.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
They advocate for using the state to actively intervene and correct the negative outcomes of the market.
And what kind of policies are we talking about here? What are their typical go-to solutions?
You'll usually see strong support for things like universal public services, free education, comprehensive health care like the NHS,
Right.
a strong welfare state providing a robust safety net, unemployment benefits, pensions, disability support, and crucially, progressive taxation.
Meaning the rich pay a higher percentage.
Exactly. Higher taxes on corporations and high earners to fund those public services and redistribute wealth, aiming for a more level playing field, more equality of opportunity and outcome to some extent.
And what role do they see for sociology in all this?
They see sociologists as having a really vital, practical role to play
How so?
by doing the research, by identifying where the inequalities are in income, health, education, housing, and understanding the mechanisms creating them. Sociologists provide the evidence base.
So sociology informs the policy.
Precisely. It helps policymakers design targeted, effective interventions based on solid evidence, not just guesswork or ideology. It's about using sociological knowledge to find realistic solutions that can genuinely improve people's lives and reduce inequality. For students, this highlights how your research skills could directly contribute to social justice goals.
Makes sense. Okay, finally we arrive at postmodernism, which throws a bit of a spanner in the works for the whole idea of social policy, doesn't it?
It certainly offers a different and often quite challenging perspective.
Yes.
Postmodernists are generally quite skeptical about the whole project of using grand sociological theories to design social policy.
Skeptical why? What's the issue?
Well, they fundamentally question whether we can actually have one single correct understanding of society, or even agree on what a better society would look like.
And this connects to their rejection of meta-narratives, right? Those big, all-encompassing theories.
Exactly that. They argue that grand theories like Marxism or functionalism try to impose a single story, a single explanation, onto a world that is actually incredibly complex, fragmented, and diverse.
Too messy for one big theory.
That's the idea. They emphasize the sheer variety of individual experiences, viewpoints, cultures, identities, all existing side by side. So trying to create a one-size-fits-all policy based on one theory,
It's bound to fail some people.
or worse, it might actively ignore or marginalize the realities of many groups whose experiences don't fit the dominant narrative.
So if you had a policy about the family,
A postmodernist would immediately jump in and say, which family? Are
Yeah.
we talking nuclear family, single parent, blended, same-sex parents, chosen families? The category itself is problematic because it masks so much diversity. Their focus tends to be much more on the local, the specific, the diversity of experiences, and the instability of knowledge itself. This leads to a deep suspicion of universal solutions driven by what they see as overly ambitious sociological theories. For students, it's a reminder to be critical of grand claims and to pay attention to diverse voices and lived realities.
okay, wow. So pulling that all together, quite a journey. We've seen functionalism using sociology for social order, the new right warning about dependency, Marxism seeing policy as serving capitalism,
Right.
feminism highlighting patriarchy but also driving change,
Yeah.
social democrats aiming to reduce inequality within the system.
And postmodernism questioning the very idea of universal solutions based on these big theories.
It really shows, doesn't it? And for you studying sociology, it highlights how the exact same policy, let's say a universal basic income, just as an example, could be analyzed completely differently. A functionalist might worry about its impact on work ethic and social integration. A Marxist might see it as a way to prop up consumption under capitalism. A feminist might analyze how it impacts gender roles within households. A new right thinker would likely oppose it fiercely.
Absolutely. And a postmodernist might focus on how different groups experience or perceive UBI based on their unique circumstances. The lens you use fundamentally shapes what you see and how you interpret it.
Which brings us right back to that fundamental question we started with. Given all these different lenses, all these competing sociological insights, how do we decide which ones should actually inform policy?
Yeah.
Especially in a world that is diverse, that is complex. What happens if we prioritize one viewpoint, say the economic efficiency view over concerns about social justice or gender equality? What are the consequences? It's a huge challenge.
It really is. There are no easy answers. But hopefully this deep dive has given you, particularly the sociology students listening, a clearer map of these different perspectives. A framework, maybe?
Yeah, toolkit.
A toolkit, exactly, for thinking critically about social policy, for analyzing the assumptions behind different approaches, and for understanding the debates that shape the world we live in.
Absolutely. And we really do encourage you to dig deeper. Look into Durkheim, Murray, Marx. Explore feminist sociologists. Grapple with postmodernist ideas. See how these perspectives play out in today's news, in current policy debates. Because understanding these different ways of seeing isn't just academic. It's a vital skill for evaluating policy, forming your own informed opinions, and maybe, just maybe, contributing to building a better, more equitable society. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.